Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something absolutely critical for anyone in the defense world. CMMC, that's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And we're not just scratching the surface, we're digging into what it really takes to succeed the legal side, the tech requirements, the whole organizational challenge.
Yeah, look, for the defense industrial base, the DIB, CMMC isn't some future thing anymore. It's here. It's law. It's baked into federal regulations.
Right.
So what we're trying to do here, our mission, is to pull out the core strategy you need. What the experts say works. We're aiming for that comply first try mentality. Because honestly, messing this up means you might not be eligible for contracts. Simple as that.
No pressure then. We're aiming to give you the actionable stuff, the real path from figuring out your scope all the way to being ready on assessment day. It's like the blueprint for the new reality.
It really is. If you handle CUI-controlled unclassified information this is, well, you need to be listening.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So getting ready for CMMC, it's a project management challenge. It's got these 4 big milestones.
Right.
And you really have to think about it that way. A lot of companies, they treat it just like an IT problem.
Yeah, I can see that.
But, to actually get through it successfully, it needs structure. It needs the whole business aligned. It builds step by step.
Okay, so step 1, milestone 1. This is where you say a lot of people stumble right out of the gate. Define your scope. Why is getting that boundary right, knowing what's in, what's out, so absolutely fundamental?
Because, well, everything else flows from it. Your cost, the complexity, the timeline, it all hinges on scope. The mission here is crystal clear. Establish the CMMC assessment boundary. Precisely.
And that means finding everything that touches CUI.
Everything, every system, every piece of hardware or software, every person. And we're not just talking about the obvious stuff like servers and desktops. Think about operational technology, OT, industrial control systems, ICS, even things like security cameras, if they monitor areas where CUI is handled, temporary storage spots, and crucially, any third-party vendor platforms that touch the data.
Wow. Okay, so it's really about following the data, not just locking down the main server room.
Exactly. You have to trace the data flow. Think about it from the CUI walks in the door, maybe it's an email with a statement of work, right? All the way through storage, processing, transmission, until it's finally destroyed or sent back out. Where does it live? Where does it move?
And if someone, say an engineer, downloads a CUI file to their personal Dropbox for 5 minutes?
Technically, that Dropbox account just came into scope.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So a huge part of milestone 1 is actually preventing that kind of sprawl. Containing the CUI before you even think about assessment. Cleaning house.
That sounds like it needs more than just the IT folks involved. You need the people actually using the data day to day.
Absolutely. You need the business process owners, the engineers, the project managers, maybe even legal or contracts people. They're the ones who know where CUI might end up, sometimes accidentally.
Because the IT team knows the network map, but the users know the shortcuts and workarounds where CUI might hide.
You nailed it. IT knows the firewalls. The business knows the shadows. And look, part of this is also clearly separating what needs protection, your security protection assets, things like your MFA system, your logging servers. They're critical infrastructure from assets that are genuinely out of scope.
Right.
Because a tight, well-justified scope means fewer systems for the assessor to look at. And that directly saves money and time during the actual assessment. Big time.
Okay, makes sense. So once you've done that painstaking work to draw the line, you hit milestone 2, document your environment. This sounds like translating that boundary into, well, paperwork the assessor can understand. What does that actually look like? It's not just a paragraph saying we're secure, right?
Oh, definitely not. This needs to be your definitive guide to your security posture. The anchor is the System Security Plan, the SSP. But around that, you need specifics. Detailed network diagrams are key.
Okay.
They need to show the boundaries, how things are segmented, the connections. We can talk more about what kind of diagrams later, but they have to be security focused. You also need a really precise asset inventory.
What's in the inventory? Like serial numbers?
Hardware models, firmware versions, software licenses, patch levels, even physical locations like which room houses the secure servers. It has to be detailed enough that an assessor can pick an asset and understand its role in security status.
And one thing that seems like a huge challenge here, based on the materials, is getting those external dependencies documented, your cloud providers, other services. How do you nail that?
Yeah, that's often a really weak spot for companies. If you're using Microsoft 365 or AWS or Google Cloud or even smaller software as a service providers, you're inheriting some security controls from them.
Right, like the physical security of their data center.
Exactly. Your documentation has to include what's called a customer responsibility matrix, or CRM. It sounds fancy, but it's just a clear statement. Here's what the provider handles, like that physical security, and here's what we, the customer, are responsible for.
Like setting up user permissions correctly or enforcing MFA within the service?
Precisely. If you don't have that CRM, the assessor has to assume you're responsible for everything, and you could get marked down for controls the cloud provider is actually doing perfectly well. It's a common pitfall.
Got it. Okay, documentation's done. Now, big one, maybe the most expensive one, milestone 3, implement and validate controls. This is where the rubber meets the road, technologically. What's the hurdle here besides just the cost?
I'd say the biggest thing is misalignment.
Yeah.
The source materials use this phrase. They say policies, procedures, tech, and practices all need to sing the right song.
Huh, okay. Like they need to match up.
Exactly. Implementation isn't just buying the tech. It's making sure that what your policies, so you do that documentation from milestone 2, actually matches what your systems are configured for and what your employees are actually doing every day.
So if the policy says quarterly vulnerability scans,
The assessor is going to ask to see the reports for the last 4 quarters. Completed. Documented. Showing if you followed the procedure you wrote down, it needs to be operationalized, not just aspirational.
and validation. That sounds like proving it works before the assessor shows up. That comply first try idea again, mock assessments, gathering evidence.
Absolutely critical. You have to gather the proof, collect the artifacts. These are your logs, configuration files, screenshots, training records, meeting minutes from your change control board, whatever demonstrates that you're meeting every single assessment objective or AO.
Okay, assessment objectives. For CMMC Level 2, there are 110 controls, but how many AOs does that break down into?
Roughly 320.
320.
Yep. It's granular. An AO is a very specific requirement. For example, one control might be about system integrity, but the AOs under it might ask you to prove integrity checking on the OS and on critical applications and maybe even firmware.
Wow.
So you need evidence for each of those 320 points. If you run a mock assessment internally and you can't quickly pull up proof for every single one, you're just not ready for the C3PAO.
Which brings us logically to the final prep stage, milestone 4, assessment day readiness. This sounds like making sure everything is polished and easy for the assessor.
This is really about making the assessment smooth, efficient, and frankly, less painful for everyone. It's the difference between passing confidently and, well, potentially failing expensively.
So what does that look like practically?
Well, obviously having that SSP current and ready to go.
Yeah.
But the real key is preparing your subject matter experts, your SMEs, the people the assessor will actually talk to.
Okay.
The concept here is often called evidence binders. They might not be physical binders anymore, but organized digital folders, maybe even scripts ready to run.
So when the assessor says, show me how you implement control AC.2.001.
Your SME doesn't fumble. They click a folder, maybe run a pre-save script or query, pull up the exact configuration screen or log file instantly. Boom, evidence provided.
Okay, that makes sense. Efficiency, confidence.
It saves huge amounts of time, reduces stress for your team, and honestly, it shows the assessor you're mature, organized, and competent. It builds confidence.
That whole 4-milestone journey really lays out the practical side, the project management. But like you said at the start, none of this is optional. We need to understand the legal framework CMMC sits on. This isn't just a good idea, it's the law.
Cannot stress this enough. CMMC isn't a framework you adopt voluntarily. It's legally codified. There are 2 main pieces of federal regulation that make this real.
Okay, first up, 32 CFR Part 170. What's that one?
That's the rule book for the program itself. It was published in the Code of Federal Regulations, October 2024, I believe, and it basically defined the whole CMMC architecture.
So it laid out the levels 1, 2, and 3.
Yep, the levels, the assessment processes, the whole ecosystem, the roles of the DoD's program office, the cyber AB, the C3PAOs, all of that. It's the law that created CMMC as a formal program and said, okay, assessments start January 2025.
Got it. And the second piece is the 48 CFR rule. This sounds like the contract part.
Exactly. This rule changes the acquisition regulations, the EFR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, and specifically for defense, the DFARS. Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement.
Okay.
This one was published September 10th, became effective November 10th. And what it does is mandate the specific contract language, primarily the DFARS Clause 7021, that contracting officers must put into DoD contracts and solicitations.
So 32 CFR says what CMMC is and how it works. And 48 CFR puts the clause in the contract that says you must comply with CMMC to get this work.
Precisely. One defines the program, the other enforces it through contracts.
Yeah.
And, understand why we needed such a big shift really requires looking back a bit. It starts way back in 2010 with the CUI program itself.
Ah, right. Executive Order 13556.
Yes. This came out of the post-9/11 reviews. The 9/11 Commission found huge intelligence sharing failures, partly because agencies labeled sensitive but unclassified information inconsistently.
So CUI was meant to standardize that.
Exactly. Standardize how the government handles and shares information that isn't classified but still needs protection because it relates to national interests. Things like critical infrastructure data, export-controlled tech specs, law enforcement sensitive info. The National Archives manages the overall program.
Then fast forward to 2016, and contractors get their first big mandate with DFARS Clause 7.0.
Yeah, 7.12 was a huge step. It said if you handle CUI, you must comply with NIST SP 800-171. That's the set of 110 security controls.
Okay.
And importantly, it also mandated that if you use a cloud service provider for CUI, that provider had to meet the FedRAMP moderate baseline. It was the DoD's first real attempt to set a standard across the whole supply chain.
There was a problem, the self-attestation loophole.
The Achilles heel. Companies just had to say they were compliant, check a box.
And were they?
Well, the evidence strongly suggests, no, not widely. The phrase used in the source material is pretty blunt. The DIB was leaking data like a sieve.
Wow.
Adversaries were just vacuuming up U.S. technology. Blueprints for weapon systems, advanced manufacturing techniques, proprietary data. It was bad. There was a DoD Inspector General report around 2019 that confirmed widespread non-compliance. Companies knew they weren't meeting 800-171, but there was no real enforcement, no verification.
So before CMMC was fully baked, the DoD tried to put some teeth into the existing rules with DFARS 7019 and 7020 around 2020.
Exactly. These were like interim measures, stopgaps. DFARS 7019 said, okay, you still self-attest, but you have to use this specific DoD scoring methodology based on 800-171, and you have to post that score in SPRS.
SPRS being the Supplier Performance Risk System.
Right, so now your self-assessment score was visible, standardized, and theoretically auditable.
And 7020 was the stick to go with that carrot, or maybe just more stick?
Pretty much more stick. DFARS 7020 gave the DoD, specifically the Defense Contract Management Agency, DCMA, the right to come in and conduct their own assessment, basically. Audit your SPRS score. So if you posted a score of, say, 105 out of 110, but the DCMA came in and assessed you at like 50, you had a major credibility problem, potentially impacting future contracts. These two clauses together really set the stage for mandatory, verifiable compliance. They showed self-attestation wasn't enough, #take 3, CMMC program structure and ecosystem.
Okay, that history makes the why of CMMC very clear. Let's dig into the structure itself now. What are the big picture goals, and who are all the players involved in making this happen?
Well, the core objectives are pretty straightforward, building on that history. First, obviously, protect CUI and also FCI federal contract information.
Okay.
Second, create a level playing field. Get rid of that inconsistency where some companies invested heavily in security under 7012 and others didn't. CMMC means everyone bidding for the same work has to meet the same verified standards.
So it raises the bar for everyone.
Raises the floor, really.
Yeah.
And the third objective is accountability, which comes through those independent, certified third-party assessments, the C3PAOs.
Right.
And the ultimate goal underpinning all of this is strengthening national security, protecting the technology that our warfighters rely on from being stolen. It's replacing, trust us, we're compliant, with show us, prove it through an independent audit.
Makes sense. So let's look at the levels. There are 3.
3 levels. Level 1 is the baseline. It's focused on protecting FCI, which is information the government provides or generates under a contract that isn't meant for public release, but it's usually not highly sensitive like CUI.
And what controls does that involve?
It maps to 15 basic safeguarding requirements found in a different regulation, FAR 52.20421. Now, it's often called a self-assessment, and it is, but don't let that fool you. To properly self-assess for level 1, you actually have to meet 59 specific assessment objectives derived from those 15 controls. You need evidence for all 59. You do an annual self-assessment and then formally firm it in SPRS. And this potentially applies to any company with any federal contract, not just DoD.
Okay, so even level 1 requires real rigor and proof.
Absolutely. Then you have level 2. This is a big one for most defense contractors because it's required for handling CUI.
And this aligns with the old requirement.
Yes, level 2 requires implementing all 110 controls from NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2. The assessment here happens every 3 years.
Is it always a third-party assessment?
Mostly. The rule allows the DoD, for certain contracts involving CUI that aren't deemed critical or high priority, to permit a level 2 self-assessment, again posted in SPRS with an annual affirmation.
But the acceptation is that's rare.
Very rare, especially as we move into the later phases of the rollout. The strong signal from DoD is that if you handle CUI, you should plan for a C3PAO certification assessment every 3 years, plus that annual affirmation.
Okay, and level 3.
Level 3 is for protecting CUI associated with the most critical defense programs. It builds on level 2. You have the 110 controls from 800-171, plus 24 additional, more advanced controls from another NIST standard, SP 800-172.
So 134 controls total.
Right. These extra controls are really focused on enhanced security practices designed to thwart advanced persistent threats, sophisticated nation-state attackers.
And the assessment for level 3.
That's done not by a C3PAO, but by the DoD's own assessment organization, the DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. That assessment also happens every 3 years and, again, requires that annual affirmation in SPRS.
Got it. Now, let's map out the players in this CMC ecosystem. It seems like there are quite a few organizations involved.
There are, and it's designed that way to ensure checks and balances and integrity. At the very top, you have the CMMC Program Management Office, PMO. Within the DoD, they oversee the whole thing.
Okay.
Then, reporting up to them in a way, you have the CMMC accreditation body, which is now officially known as the Cyber AB.
The Cyber AB, what's their job?
They are critical. They're the ones who authorize the C3PAOs, the Certified Third-Party Assessment Organizations, to actually conduct those Level 2 certification assessments. The Cyber AB has to operate according to international standards, specifically ISO 17011, which governs accreditation bodies. They accredit the assessors.
So the C3PAOs are the auditors on the ground for level 2.
Correct. They're the independent organizations that companies hire to come in and perform the assessment. And their independence is paramount.
Meaning?
A C3PAO absolutely cannot provide CMMC consulting services to a company and then also assess that same company. It's a strict conflict of interest rule. Even if the consulting happened years ago on a totally different system, the line is bright. Assessment and consulting must be separate.
Okay, that makes sense for impartiality. Now, where does the CAICO fit in? That's another acronym.
Right, the CIICO, the CMMC Assessor and Instructor Certification Organization, their job is about the people. They are responsible for certifying the individual assessors, the CCAs, certified CMMC assessors, and the certified CMMC professionals, or CCPs. They also certify the licensed training providers and instructors.
And they have to be separate from the Cyber AB. Why?
Yes, the law specifically requires the CITO to be independent from the Cyber AB. He has to comply with a different ISO standard, 17024, which is for bodies certifying persons.
What's the thinking there? Why not let the Cyber AB, who accredits the C3PAO firms, also certify the individuals who work for them?
It's about preventing potential conflicts, or even the appearance of conflicts. Imagine if the same body accredited the C3PAO and certified its assessors. There could be pressure, maybe subtle, to lower the bar for individual certification just to make sure there are enough certified assessors to meet the demand from the accredited C3PAOs.
Ah, okay. Separating them keeps the focus on individual competence.
Exactly. The CAICO's job is purely ensuring the assessors and instructors are properly qualified based on objective standards and that the training content is sound. It protects the integrity of the individual certification.
Okay, one more key role. The OSC affirming official. OSC is the organization seeking certification. Who is this affirming official?
This is a really important one, especially regarding liability. The affirming official is a senior executive within the company getting assessed, typically the CEO, maybe the CFO, CIO, or president, someone high up.
And what do they affirm?
They are the person who has to digitally sign and submit that annual affirmation of compliance into SPRS for all levels. They are, as the source material colorfully puts it, the one putting their head on the chopping block.
Why chopping block?
Because if that affirmation is found to be false, meaning the company wasn't actually maintaining compliance as affirmed, that executive can be held personally liable under the False Claims Act.
Personally liable, not just the company.
Potentially, yes. The False Claims Act allows for significant penalties. including potential individual liability for submitting false information to the government for financial gain, like winning a contract. It puts real teeth into ensuring executives take compliance seriously and don't just sign off without due diligence.
Wow. Okay. Personal liability definitely raises the stakes. So with that structure and accountability in place, let's talk about the clock. CMMC status is directly tied to contract eligibility. If your status isn't right, you're out. We need to understand what these statuses mean.
Absolutely. The system defines 7 specific assessment statuses. Things like Final Level 1 Self-Assessment, Conditional Level 2 C3PAO Assessment, Final Level 3 DIB-CAC Assessment, and so on.
Okay.
But from a practical standpoint, the only thing that really matters for getting a contract is whether you have a current status.
And what defines current status? How long does it last?
Current status means 2 things are true. First, your assessment itself is still valid.
Yeah.
Generally, a Level 2 or Level 3 assessment gives you an eligibility window of up to 3 years. Level 1 is annual.
Okay, 3 years for level 2 and 3. What's the second part?
The second part is that your required annual affirmation for the current year has been successfully submitted in SPRS. You need both, a valid assessment window and the current year's affirmation.
And if one of those lapses, your assessment expires, or you forget the affirmation.
Your status immediately becomes expired. You are no longer eligible for new contract awards or even option year renewals on existing contracts that require CMMC. And critically, you have to maintain that current status for the entire life of the contract. Compliance isn't a snapshot, it's continuous.
How does the contracting officer, the COC, actually check this?
Through the CMMC UID, the unique identifier. Every system-level assessment that gets posted into SPRS generates a unique ID number.
Ah, okay.
When a company submits a bid for a contract requiring CMMC, they have to provide the CMMC UID for the specific information system they plan to use for handling the CUI on that contract. The CEO's job is then to go into SPRS, look up that UID, and verify its status.
And what do they see?
They see the assessment level achieved, level 1, 2, or 3, the type of assessment, self, C3PAO, DIB-CAC, the status, conditional or final, the date of the assessment, and the expiration date. If that UID doesn't show a current status, the CO is required by the regulation to deem the offeror ineligible.
No wiggle room.
No wiggle room. Now, how this actually impacts contracts depends on the phased implementation timeline the DoD set out. Phase 1 started when the rule became effective, November 10th.
What happens in Phase 1?
Phase 1 is the first 12 months. During this time, the DFAR 7021 clause requiring CMMC starts appearing in all new DoD solicitations and contracts. However, the default requirement will often be Level 1 or maybe Level 2 self-assessment.
So kind of easing into it.
Sort of. But, and this is crucial, the CEO always retains discretion. Even in Phase 1, if the contract involves sensitive CUI or is for a high-priority program, the CEO can override the default and require Level 2 certification assessment right away.
Okay. Then comes Phase 2, which runs from month 12 to month 24. What changes then?
Phase 2 is where the rubber really meets the road for CUI handlers. The expectation shifts. Solicitations involving CUI will generally start requiring a Level 2 C3PAO certification assessment as a condition of award.
So self-assessment for CUI becomes the exception.
Very much the exception. The DoD has publicly estimated that less than 5% of contracts involving CUI will allow self-assessment once Phase 2 kicks in. The message to industry is clear. Get certified.
And Phase 4, it seems we skipped Phase 3 in the notes. Maybe it's combined or less distinct. But Phase 4 starts at month 36. Full steam ahead.
Exactly. By the time Phase 4 begins, 36 months after the effective date, the transition is complete. All applicable DoD solicitations and contracts will include the required CMMC level as a non-negotiable condition of award and contract performance. It's just the way business is done.
Now, there's an interesting wrinkle about conditional status. You can actually win a contract even if you failed a few minor things in your assessment.
Yes, that's possible for Level 2 and Level 3. If your assessment results in a conditional status, meaning you met most controls but missed a few minor low-point ones, you can still be awarded the contract.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch. Those deficiencies have to be documented on a plan of action and milestones, a POA&M. And that POA&M must be completely closed out, meaning the deficiencies fixed and verified within 180 days of the assessment results being submitted.
180 days? Oh, that sounds tight. What happens if you miss the deadline?
It's brutal. If you don't close out that POA&M within 180 days, your conditional CMMC status automatically expires, instantly. You're deemed non-compliant. This likely puts you in default on the contract you just won, and you're certainly ineligible for any new work until you go through a whole new assessment. That 180-day clock is a massive pressure point.
And again, the CO has no choice here. if SPRS has expired.
That's it. The regulations direct the CO to verify SPRS. If the UID linked to the system doesn't show a current status, the award can't happen, the option can't be exercised. It's designed to be automatic, removing subjective judgment.
Okay, given that phased rollout, but also the CO's discretion and the pressure from primes,
Yeah.
it makes total sense why we're hearing that prime contractors are pushing these requirements down much faster than the official DoD timeline.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about risk management for them. Think about it. If you're a prime contractor on a 5-year program, can you risk awarding a subcontract to a company that might only have a conditional level 2 status that could expire in 180 days?
No way. If the sub fails, the whole program could be jeopardized and the prime is on the hook.
Exactly. So primes are saying to their subs, look, I don't care if the DoD says phase 2 starts next year. For this contract, we need you to have a final level 2 certification from a C3 PAO now, before we even award you the subcontract. They're compressing the DoD's timeline dramatically to protect themselves. For many subcontractors, the deadline is effectively immediate, which brings us right back to the beginning. Getting that scope right is even more urgent when primes are pushing deadlines. We talked about needing business owner input. Where does CUI typically hide, causing scope creep?
Yeah, where are the common hiding spots?
Well, the biggest culprits tend to be unauthorized or poorly managed shared resources. Think about things like consumer-grade cloud storage, personal Dropbox, Google Drive accounts used for work,
Oh, yeah.
unencrypted email archives stretching back years, sometimes even local hard drives on workstations where someone downloaded a spec temporarily and forgot about it, print servers holding queue files. It's often in these convenient but insecure places.
So the IT team might have the main network locked down, but the data leaks out through user habits.
Often, yes. That's why you need those frank conversations. You need to ask the project managers, the engineers, okay, honestly, walk me through your actual process for sharing this file or accessing this drawing. Where does it really go? Not just the official process, the real world one.
And beyond just finding the CUI, you also mentioned needing to understand all the contract's security requirements, not just the basic CMMC level.
Yes, absolutely. CMMC Level 2, based on NIST 800-171, is primarily focused on protecting the confidentiality of CUI. But your specific contract might have additional clauses, maybe requirements about data integrity or availability, specific vulnerability scanning frequencies or tools, or maybe enhanced protections for particularly sensitive types of CUI, things like Navy nuclear information, NNPI, or export-controlled technical data, ITERIOR. You need to read the whole contract, especially Section H and Section C, to catch these extras. Failing to meet a specific contract clause, even if you're CMMC Level 2 certified, is still non-compliance.
Okay, now what about old data? You've got archives stretching back years, maybe created before anyone even used the term CUI. Does all of that need to be hunted down and marked?
Thankfully, no. The official CUI marking guidance provides some relief there. Legacy information data created before the CUI program was fully implemented and mandated for your contracts generally does not need to be retrospectively marked.
Phew.
However, there's a key exception.
Yeah.
If you take that legacy data and use it to create something new, a new design, a new report, a new process derived from the old info, then that new derivative work must be properly marked as CUI and fall under all the CMMC protection requirements.
So don't touch the old stuff unless you have to, and if you do, the new product gets marked.
That's the gist of it. Now, related to marking, there's this danger of over-labeling. Companies get scared and just slap a CUI marking on everything to be safe. Why is that a bad idea financially?
Yeah, it seems safer, but how does it hurt?
It can be incredibly costly. Every system, every process, every person that handles data marked as CUI potentially falls into your CMMC assessment scope.
Right.
So imagine you're a manufacturer. You might instinctively think your entire ERP system, your big manufacturing execution system, MES, on the factory floor, maybe even your HR systems, need to be in scope because some CUI might touch them eventually.
And securing systems like ERP or MES to NIST 800-171 standards is not cheap.
Not cheap at all. You're talking potentially millions in assets, huge complexity, needing constant monitoring, logging, patching, access controls, all validated against those 110 controls and 320 AOs.
Yeah.
It's a massive undertaking.
So what's the alternative?
The alternative is to do that careful scoping. Talk to your government customer, talk to the prime. Confirm exactly what data they consider CUI under the contract. You might find out that CUI is actually limited to, say, the engineering drawings and related technical data, which only reside on a specific segregated network segment used by the design team.
Ah, so you could potentially exclude that entire multi-million-dollar ERP MES system from the scope.
Precisely. By confirming the actual CUI boundary, you might take huge, complex, expensive systems completely out of the assessment scope. That translates directly into massive savings on implementation, monitoring, and the assessment itself. It is probably the single biggest cost-saving activity in CMMC prep. Nail down your actual CUI boundary. Don't guess, and don't overlabel out of fear.
Okay, that's a huge takeaway. Now let's talk about the first deliverable an assessor often wants to see. System diagrams. You mentioned earlier they have a specific preference, maybe different from what IT normally produces.
They definitely do. Assessors generally prefer what you call conceptual, component-level diagrams. Think security-focused sketches.
Sketches, like not super detailed network maps.
Exactly. Often, simple diagrams made in PowerPoint, Visio, or even, yes, Microsoft Paint are perfectly acceptable if they clearly show the right things.
And what are the right things?
They need to clearly illustrate the CMMC assessment boundary. Where does the protected environment begin and end? They need to show how the network is segmented, maybe using VLANs or different physical networks to separate CUI systems from the corporate network or the internet. They need to show where the firewalls and other boundary protection devices sit. And crucially, they need to depict the primary data flows involving CUI. Where does it come in? Where is it stored? Where does it go out?
So the focus is purely on the security architecture relevant to CUI.
Precisely. What assessors generally don't want is your typical super dense IT network diagram that shows every single server, switch, router, IP address, subnet mask, and cable run.
Why not? Seems more complete.
It's too much noise. That level of technical detail actually makes it harder for the assessor to quickly understand the security posture and identify the boundary they need to focus on. It obscures the important stuff. Keep it clean, keep it conceptual, keep it focused on the security story. Here's our CUI enclave, here's how we protect it, here's how data moves in and out securely. #tag city, CAP phases.
Okay, this is where, as you said, it gets really interesting. We've done the prep, the scoping, the documentation, the implementation, months, maybe years of work. Now, the C3PAO is knocking on the door. Let's walk through the official CMMC assessment process, the CAP, that these auditors follow.
Right, the CAP is the playbook for the C3PAOs.
Yeah.
It ensures that every Level 2 certification assessment is done consistently, fairly, and thoroughly, no matter which C3PAO you hire. Makes the results trustworthy. And it's broken down into 4 main phases. It starts well before they actually show up for the interviews.
Phase 1 is conduct the pre-assessment. Sounds like a readiness check.
It is exactly that. It's a critical gate. Before the C3PAO even finalizes the assessment team or schedule, they need to conduct this pre-assessment activity. Primarily, this involves reviewing your system security plan, SSP, and other core documentation you provide.
What are they looking for?
They're validating that the scope you've defined seems reasonable and complete based on your description of CUI handling. They're checking if you've identified all your relevant assets, and importantly, they're looking for indicators that you actually have the necessary evidence available to demonstrate compliance for each control. They want to see signs that you're truly ready.
Does this include checking on those external providers, the cloud services?
Oh, absolutely. Part of Phase 1 is verifying that you, the OSC, Organization Seeking Certification, have obtained that Customer Responsibility Matrix, CRM we talked about earlier, from all your in-scope external service providers, ESPs and CSPs.
Why is that check so early?
Because if you don't have the CRMs, the assessor can't determine which controls are inherited versus which ones they need to assess you on. It's fundamental to defining the assessment scope accurately. If you can't produce the CRMs, the assessment might be paused right there until you get them.
And this phase also highlights that comply first try rule. Again, no known problems allowed at the start.
Correct. This is a really key point that trips companies up. You cannot start a formal CMMC assessment if you have known unimplemented requirements. You have to attest, essentially, that you believe you are 100% compliant before the C3PAO even begins Phase 2.
So POA&Ms are only for things the assessor finds.
Exactly. POA&Ms, plans of action and milestones, can only be generated based on deficiencies the assessor identifies during the formal assessment in Phase 2. If you walk into the assessment knowing you haven't fully implemented, say, multi-factor authentication everywhere it's required, the C3PAO should ethically refuse to start the assessment or fail you quickly. It forces you to fix known gaps before spending money on the formal audit.
Okay, assuming you pass the pre-assessment readiness check, we move into Phase 2. Assess conformity to security requirements. This is the main event, right? The on-site interviews and testing.
This is the core of the audit, yes. It typically takes anywhere from, say, 3 to 5 days, maybe longer for very complex environments. It involves the assessment team interviewing your SMEs, doing deep dives into your documentation, policies, procedures, SSP, and performing actual system testing and observation.
And how deep does that testing go? You mentioned the 320 assessment objectives.
It has to cover all applicable AOs. And critically, the implementation of a control must be assessed across all the different components within your defined CMMC boundary where that control applies.
Can you give an example of that, like for password complexity?
Sure. Let's say Control IA-Bot 2.080 requires enforcing minimum password complexity. The assessor won't just check your main Active Directory domain policy. They need to verify that complexity requirement is also enforced on any Linux servers in scope, on network devices like firewalls and switches, on any cloud platforms you manage, like user accounts in your Azure or AWS consoles, and maybe even on specific applications that have their own user accounts.
Wow, so one control might require checking configurations in 5 or 6 different places.
Easily. They have to be sure the control is implemented consistently across the entire scoped environment where CUI could be impacted. If they find one system, maybe a legacy database server, that isn't enforcing the password rules, then that assessment objective gets marked not met, even if 99 other systems are doing it right. It's thorough.
Okay. After the intense assessment phase, we get to phase 3, complete and report assessment results. What happens here?
The C3PAO compiles all their findings, what they observed, tested, reviewed into a formal report. The OSC first receives a preliminary findings report, which details any controls or AOs that were found to be not met.
Is that when the POA&M gets created, if needed?
Potentially, yes. If deficiencies were found that are eligible for a POA&M, this is where they'd be formally documented. Phase 3 also involves a critical evidence retention requirement.
What's that?
All the digital artifacts, the logs, screenshots, configuration files, policy documents, etc., that the C3PAO uses objective evidence during the assessment must be cryptographically hashed. The C3PAO provides these hashes to the OSC.
And the OSC has to keep the original file.
Yes, the OSC must securely retain the original evidence artifacts corresponding to those hashes for 6 years. The hash values themselves get uploaded by the C3PAO into the DoD's central system, which is called EMAR, actually not DMAS, as mentioned in some older material, the Enterprise Mission Assurance Support Service. This creates an immutable, auditable record of the evidence that supported the assessment outcome.
6 years. Okay, finally, phase 4, issue certificate and close out POA&M. If you got a conditional score, this is where that 180-day clock really starts ticking loud.
Extremely loudly. We mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. If you received a conditional level 2 or level 3 status, you have exactly 180 calendar days from the date the assessment results were submitted to EMAS to fix all the deficiencies listed on the POA&M.
And how do you prove you fixed them?
That typically requires the C3PAO to conduct a follow-up, limited assessment, often called a POA&M closeout assessment, just focused on verifying the remediation actions for the failed controls.
And if you miss that 180-day deadline by even 1 day,
your conditional CMMC status expires immediately in EMAS Gazette. It's gone. You're back to square one, needing a completely new assessment, and you're ineligible for contracts in the meantime. There is zero flexibility on that deadline.
And not everything can even go on a POA&M, right? Some failures are just failures.
Yeah, correct. POA&Ms have strict limitations. Generally, they're only allowed for deficiencies related to controls that carry a lower point value in the DoD's scoring methodology, typically just 1 point. These are considered less critical controls, where remediation might be simpler.
But some controls are automatic fails.
Yes. The CMMC rule itself, in 32 CFR 170.21, explicitly lists 6 specific security requirements that are never eligible for a POA&M. Not for a C3PAO assessment, not even for a level 2 self-assessment.
What kinds of things are considered so fundamental that you can't get a conditional pass if you fail them?
They tend to be foundational security practices. While the exact control numbers might shift slightly between revisions, conceptually they often relate to things like basic access control enforcement, identifying and managing users, essential media protection like handling removable drives, clearly defining your system boundary, and having some level of continuous monitoring or incident response capability.
So if the assessor finds a major gap in one of those core areas,
you cannot achieve even a conditional status. You simply fail the assessment. You have to go back, fully implement that foundational control correctly, and then apply for a completely new assessment later. It ensures that companies have the absolute basics in place before they can even get a conditional green light.
Uh,
Hashtag ouchag outro. So wrapping this all up, if there are a couple of things to really take away from this deep dive, what are they? First, CMMC is real. It's legally mandated through those CFR rules, 32 CFR and 48 CFR. Verified compliance is now a fundamental requirement for DoD contracts. It's not optional.
mhm.
Second, while the DoD has this phased rollout plan on paper, the reality on the ground is that prime contractors are pushing these requirements down the supply chain much, much faster. So for practical purposes, you likely need to be preparing for certification now, not waiting for phase 2 or phase 4 officially. The clock is ticking faster than you think.
And for anyone just starting or maybe restarting, that journey, job number one, has to be nailing the scope. Talk to your business folks, trace the actual CUI data flows, don't overlabel, and use those clear conceptual system diagrams focused on security boundaries. Getting the scope right up front, as you said, is probably the biggest single factor in controlling cost and complexity.
Absolutely. Which brings us, I think, to a final, maybe provocative thought to leave people with. It's this tension between compliance and actual security.
How so?
Well, it's tempting, especially under pressure, to try and shortcut the process. Maybe buy a set of template policies and procedures off the shelf, fill in the blanks and say, okay, documentation, done.
Right, check the box.
But here's the danger. If that documentation, your SSP, your policies, your procedures, doesn't accurately reflect the reality of how your systems are actually configured and how your employees actually operate day to day, then that documentation becomes a liability, not an asset.
How?
Because the assessor sees the mismatch. Exactly. The assessor reads your shiny, perfect policy that says you do X, Y, and Z. Then they interview your staff or test your systems and find out you're really only doing X and maybe half of Y, and Z isn't implemented at all. That disconnect doesn't just mean you fail those controls, it demonstrates a fundamental lack of maturity and control over your environment. The paperwork, instead of approving compliance, becomes Exhibit A against you. It shows you're saying one thing and doing another.
So the documentation has to be a true reflection of reality, warts and all, or at least the reality you've actually achieved.
Precisely. Your compliance artifacts must reflect what you do, not just what you wish you did or what a template says you should do. The only sustainable path to CMMC success is to build the security practices into your actual operations first. Make security part of the culture, configure the systems correctly, train the people properly. Then the compliance documentation becomes a natural, accurate record of that secure reality. If you focus only on the paperwork exercise first, the assessment will inevitably expose the gaps, leading to failure, lost contracts, and a much harder road back.
So what does this all mean? It means CMMC is complex, the deadlines driven by primes are real and often immediate, and the consequences for not getting it right are potentially business-ending for companies in the DIB. Structured preparation, starting with accurate scoping, is not just recommended, it's essential for survival. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.